Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
If there is a victory, because that was the big thing in the headline in Block Cap, victory, it's that Mr. King, and I'm happy for him. It looks like he got his ticket tossed. He didn't deserve a $1,200 ticket just
Nobody
for protesting. No, of course, nobody. So that's a victory. And that's it. All this other stuff, it's irrelevant. It was not argued. And, Sheila, this has really become a runaway train.
It doesn't mean that there is no evidence that Alberta Health has not isolated the coronavirus. It also doesn't mean that there is evidence that they isolated the coronavirus. It just means that that evidence, if it's out there or not out there, they didn't have to produce it because it's not relevant to the ticket in court that Pat King was fighting. And that's it. And that, I think, is salient to debunking the hysteria around all of this.
But, Sheila, and on Pat King, you have far more knowledge about this individual than I do. So, please, why don't you set the table? This is, of course, all about information that isn't quite right about Pat King getting a major victory for Albertans in a court of law. And by the way, folks, when we deconstruct this, don't shoot the messenger and don't accuse us of being psyops or controlled opposition. That's not the fact. Sheila has the facts because she's gone through the court transcripts. And what did you discover, Sheila?
Sure. And let me preface this by saying I don't have any skin in the game. I don't really know Pat King at all. But I do have an interest in making sure that the truth is out there. I think that's one of the things that Ezra always tells us: follow the facts where they go. And then we'll make our conclusions. But we can't throw out some facts or go on have a conclusion and then just craft a story around it. That's not what we do here. So I think by now everybody has seen the Stu Peters, at least the headline of the Stu Peters Rumble chat that he had with Pat King, who is a Red Deer-based activist, an anti-lockdown activist. And before that, he was a pro-oil and gas activist. And again, I don't know Pat King from anybody, really. But Justin, would you mind bringing up the headline of that Rumble Stu Peters story, if you could? Because I forget the exact headline. And I also want to preface this by saying I court report all the time. So I don't want to say, I'm not saying that I'm smarter than anybody, and I'm definitely not saying that lawyers are smarter than common people. Lawyers are just common people with an expertise in law. So let's get that out of the way right away. But I do court report, so I have some familiarity with legal jargon that the regular layperson might not have. You don't need it. You're not court reporting, right? Like no disrespect intended. But so I want to first point out the timeline of all of this here, because it says freedom fighter court victory ends masking, shots, and quarantine in Alberta. Now, if you know, the masking and basically the end of our lockdown was July 1st. That was the end of our lockdown. Yeah. This court case transpired roughly on July 19th. So that Stu Peters would attribute credit to Pat King, I don't think is accurate or fair. And Pat King's court case didn't do any of that. But I actually took the time to read the transcript of what went down in court that day. And I also read the originating documents from Alberta Health Services about what went down. Now, in that video, Pat King says that AHS has no material evidence that COVID-19 exists. It says the chief medical officer has no material evidence. And in the video, he presents this as, and I don't know if this is intentional or otherwise, that means that there is no evidence that COVID-19 exists. Now, that's not the case. Yeah. It may be the case, it may not be the case, but that's not what that statement means. Material in legal jargon means relevant evidence. Yeah. And then those proceedings or the court filings go on to explain exactly what that means. So, Justin, could you bring up, I sent you a document earlier about the AHS, their response. Okay, so I went through this with a fine-tooth comb so that you could see. Let's go to number 8, because the first part is all just sort of setting the scene. So number 8, and I'm going to read this off my phone. It says the chief medical officer has no material evidence. That doesn't mean that there's no evidence. It means material or relevant evidence to this case. Number 8 is important. Mr. King has no evidence showing that the evidence sought from the chief medical officer is likely to be material. So let's just cross out material and say relevant to the provincial court proceedings, contrary to, and then it gives the section of the code regarding his ticket. So what that means is the chief medical officer has no information about his specific ticket. And as such, the justice of the peace did not have jurisdiction to issue the subpoena, and it should be squashed on this basis. So this is a jurisdictional issue. So, let's go into number 9. Mr. King explained the reason for the subpoena in the document he attached as Schedule A to the subpoena. It is clear that Mr. King seeks evidence relating to the rationale for orders issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health under the Act. He seeks evidence about crafting the statute. So he wanted the Chief Medical Officer of Health to produce evidence of isolation of the coronavirus. And I don't really know what he means by that, but that's what he asked for. And then if we move on to number 10, this is I guess the most important part. He's asking for these things that are not relevant to his ticket. And there's a reason they aren't relevant to his ticket, and it goes to procedure and charter issues that he failed to raise sooner. So let's go into section 10. The provincial court proceeding is about the December 5th, 2020 enforcement of the law when Mr. King was issued the ticket, not the rationale for the law. So they're saying this is about the ticket. You can't ask about these other things. And because you can't ask about those other things because it's not relevant to your ticket, we're not going to produce it because it's not material to the case or relevant to the case. The Chief Medical Officer of Health does not have, and Mr. King does not seek from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, so he didn't ask for it, any evidence about the ticket issued to Mr. King on December 5th, 2020. So instead of asking the Chief Medical Officer of Health for information relating directly to his ticket that he could use in court to fight his ticket, he asked for all this other stuff that's not relevant. And they're like, well, why didn't you ask for stuff relevant to your ticket? Because if we had it, we would produce it, but you didn't ask, so we're not producing all this other stuff because it's not relevant. And here's the reason it's not relevant. Further, there can be no constitutional challenge to the Act or orders issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health under the Act in the absence of proper notice to the Attorney General of Canada and the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General of Alberta under the Judicature Act. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. And Mr. King has not given any notice in the provincial court proceedings. So what they're saying there, and I read through the transcripts to find when this happened, Pat King tried to raise a constitutional issue, and the judge said, you can't do that now. You should have done that sooner, because you had to do that sooner to give notice to the court. So you can't ask for these things that you would use to argue against your ticket on a constitutional basis, all this like grand information about the virus from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, because you didn't raise that issue soon enough so they don't have to produce it. And so we're just dealing with the ticket, the circumstances of how the ticket came to be. That's what happened there. I hope everybody understands that. I know there's a lot of legal jargon there, but I tried to break it down. It doesn't mean that there is no evidence that Alberta Health has not isolated the coronavirus. It also doesn't mean that there is evidence that they isolated the coronavirus. It just means that that evidence, if it's out there or not out there, they didn't have to produce it because it's not relevant to the ticket in court that Pat King was fighting. And that's it. And that, I think, is salient to debunking the hysteria around all of this. Not only was Alberta opened 3 weeks prior to this court case, but what this court case did and what transpired in the court case is not what's being presented in the media. And I don't have any skin in the game except for the fact I want everybody out there to know, please do not try this yourself. Because if Pat King had a lawyer, he could have raised those constitutional issues sooner when appropriate. And maybe he could have got access to this information, but he didn't have a lawyer. He was trying to navigate this himself. And you know what? He got the tickets thrown out. And I don't think he got them thrown out for any other reason than the court is like, this has gone on too long. This is a waste of the court's time. Goodbye. I think that's what happened there. But the moral of the story is you need a lawyer sometimes to navigate these tough legal issues. Pat King got as far as he could on his own. I think the Crown and the court just got fed up with him, frankly, and tossed his ticket. And you know what? Great. I'm glad he doesn't have to pay it. But what you are seeing on the internet is not what these documents say, both in the transcripts and in the filings by Alberta justice lawyers. It's just not, the two things are not existing in the same reality.
No, well said, Sheila. And I think you're right. I mean, two things. One is because there are so many procedural matters and because, as you said, there's so much legal jargon, this is truly a cautionary tale when it comes to what our boss likes to refer to as homemade lawyering. Don't do it, folks, especially for something incredibly complicated like this. This is not fighting a speeding ticket, right? And it just shows you what can happen when you think you know how to proceed with a case, and yet, as Sheila mentioned, all the procedural matters, all the legal jargon, you're destined for failure. Secondly, as we said right off the hopper, this case did not end the masking rules, the shots, the quarantine, that had already occurred. If there is a victory, because that was the big thing in the headline in Block Cap, victory, it's at Mr. King, and I'm happy for him. It looks like he got his ticket tossed. He didn't deserve a $1,200 ticket just
nobody
for protesting. Does. No, of course, nobody. So that's a victory. And that's it. All this other stuff, it's irrelevant. It was not argued, and Sheila, this has really become a runaway train. And I'm not saying this with any glee. I think the reason why we're getting literally dozens of emails every day saying, "What about the Pat King story? Why aren't you covering the Pat King story?" I think it's because people in a hopeless situation are looking for any scintilla of hope, just like the thousands of people that now believe we have a new Queen of Canada, Queen Ramona. I mean, it's laughable, but it's heartbreaking too, because people are at their wits' end with these lockdowns and restrictions and everything else. But as the saying goes, if something looks too good to be true, you know how that plays out, Sheila.
Yeah, and I'm of two minds of this. I mean, it's pretty clear that we've got non-lawyers dealing with complex legal issues here, so misunderstandings happen. So I'm trying to not read into this that this is some sort of sinister misrepresentation of what's happening. That being said, if this is a misunderstanding of what happened, it's time for a public correction from everybody involved.
Yep.
Because in the interest of accuracy and integrity, I think everybody involved, from Stu Peters on down, Pat King, you too, let's set the record straight. What is being presented in the media and online is misleading thousands of people. And if people would just take the time to read the court transcripts and to understand what the word material means in the course of a legal proceeding, it is not the way that everybody's representing this. And if it is a misunderstanding, let's clear the air and fix this, because, I think the longer this goes on, the longer my mind sways towards the fact that this is purposeful misleading. So let's fix it right now, guys. Please.
And you know what, Sheila? If I do say so myself, I think a fantastic story idea for you would be for you and Mr. King to have a one-on-one interview and get to the bottom of this. I think that would be a must-watch video.
I tried to send him a Facebook message this morning and I wasn't able to. If somebody has contact information for Pat King, or if he has an email address, I would love to send him my questions. Because I have an entire email that I typed out. It took me an hour because I was going back and forth between court documents so that I got everything right, and watching the video so that I could meticulously go through what was represented in the video versus what I was reading in the court documents. I have an email typed out. I just don't have an email address to send it to. I cut and pasted it. I was going to send it in Facebook. Can't do that. So I would love to send a written email to Pat King so that he can answer these questions for me. If this is all an accident, if this is all inadvertent because we've got lay people trying to navigate the legal system, I get it. I want to put that on the record too. If this is like, I didn't really know what the word material meant. Okay, great. I'm happy. I didn't really know it either until I started court reporting. And you get a crash course in legal jargon really fast. So I understand that could be inadvertent, but the longer this goes on, we got a problem now.
Well, Sheila, I do believe I have a contact that will have Mr. King's number for you, so I'll get on that right after the live stream for you.
Oh, hi. That was a clip from our Rebel Daily live stream. It's hosted Monday, Wednesday, and Friday by the big boss man, Ezra Levant, and Tuesdays and Thursdays by me, Sheila Gunn Reid, and my good friend, David Menzies. On the live stream, we talk about the news of the day, we show some videos, and we interact with our viewers at home. We stream at 12 noon Eastern, 10 Mountain. You can find us on YouTube, Rumble, Super U, and Odyssey.